Hi everyone. I'm just gonna wait around to see if anyone pops in. Hello. I'm just gonna hang around until a couple of people pop in. I'm a couple of minutes early just to make sure that everything is working. Hi. I think I can pop a wave too. Awesome. Hello. Alright, we're gonna wait a couple more minutes. There are already a few people here. Thank you for joining in. Hi. Thanks for joining in, guys. It's still a couple of minutes earlier than 10 a.m., but we're here, and we'll just wait maybe one more minute to hit 10 a.m. and then we'll get going. Hi. Yeah. This is my first live. I've never actually done live, which is strange, but here I am. So hopefully you guys are able to hear me all okay, and just gonna make sure all the notifications are going on. All right, so it's 10 a.m., so I guess I'm going to start. Thank you for joining in, guys. My name is Parshati Patel. I am an astrophysicist by training, science communicator, educator, and researcher by profession. So I will start talking about a little bit about my background, so it kind of gives you the idea of where I come from in terms of astronomy background, but also at the same time, I will talk about, how I got into science communication and what kind of gave me the experience of, working in science communication, but at the same time, delving into research for education. I actually came to Canada when I was 20, and I came to study astronomy. I was really intrigued by stars when I was really young, especially when my aunt gave me a telescope, and I thought this would be really cool to. Hi, Krishana. I thought it would be really cool to actually, study something just by, looking at the night sky. And obviously when I, was looking at the night sky using my telescope, at that time I thought this would be a cool job just to, be there outside at night, looking at stars, taking observations. But obviously when I got into astronomy, everything changed. So when I moved here, I completed my undergrad at University of Toronto in physics and astronomy. I actually did a double degree because I was not sure what I would do if I wouldn't get into grad school in astronomy. So I wanted to have that physics background to see if I could actually work somewhere else, maybe in a company as a software developer, things like that. So I made sure to have a second degree as kind of a backup. And, if there are any people who are, looking to get into anything, I always like to have a plan B, and I would always suggest people to have a plan B for everything. And when I was in my undergrad, I took quite a lot of courses ranging from everything, like studying about stars, observation, galaxies, cosmology, which I'll talk about in a bit what each of these delve into. But I also took courses like geography, geology, holography, which is pretty interesting, and a lot of history courses as well. So kind of giving me an overall view on what you could get into in an undergrad. After that, actually, even before I finished my undergrad, in my last year, we had a course that we could actually take, which allowed us to get a little bit of a research experience. Because I was an international student, I didn't actually have a lot of opportunities in terms of doing research. I could work outside university, but I didn't get as many, scholarships, or I couldn't get into a lot of programs just because I was an international student. So I ended up, basically taking this course where literally I'm paying to be able to, do research, and I was paired up with someone that I wanted to work with. And ever since I was studying astronomy, I always wanted to learn how planets formed and how the solar system comes into being. So when I was in my fourth year, I found a professor in my department at University of Toronto that was studying how planets form and how they migrate towards the star or away from the star. And I learned that, computational skills are very important, and I learned a lot of computing during that time. And then I ended up, kind of liking that particular research area a lot. So when I decided to kind of go to grad school, I applied to all the universities that I wanted to, where they had really big, professors and groups where they had research in that particular area of formation of disks and planets. So I came to Western, which is where I'm now based as well, which had a large group of people studying disks around massive stars. And I had always seen myself studying disks around things, but I thought it would be something like our solar system, where the sun is not very massive and we know quite well what goes on around these disks. But then I ended up in a group which was very interesting, that they were studying these stars that are way more massive than our sun, and then they did a lot of interesting physics that happens in the disk because they're massive. And so I ended up finishing my master's, studying how the light from the disk blocks a lot of things in around the star and kind of what we see. So if you're looking at a star, and if it's a star and the disks are almost this way, you are kind of blocking the light from the star, and so you'll be able to see changes. I have a question right here. Would like to pursue medicine and research. So it's a very interesting topic. I'm actually going to talk about how I combined a lot of my interest of planetary science and space exploration with, interesting medicine thing as well. So give me, a few more minutes and I'll get there. So when I was doing my master's, in addition to, studying these disks, I actually had an opportunity to join a collaborative program where, obviously in addition to studying astronomy, I was also learning about planetary science and space exploration. So what is astronomy? Astronomy is something that's studying celestial objects and its phenomena. So objects could be stars, planets, comets, asteroids, galaxies, and any phenomena related to that. So anything that happens kind of above Earth's atmosphere is kind of, astronomy. But what got me into kind of learning all about space exploration, robotics, satellites, and stuff like that was this collaborative program. And space is such an interdisciplinary field that you, as a person, could be interested in medicine, as one of you guys actually asked, and you could still do research in planetary science or space exploration, because we humans, like to explore, and we have been to the moon. We have, we're planning to put more people around the moon through the Lunar Gateway. We have currently humans, on the International Space Station. We have had continuous presence for a long time there. And so our body has to adapt to a lot of these things that, you see and you feel, the things that our body is not really adapted to when you're up there on the International Space Station. And we need people to study those things. We need people to think about what would happen to our bodies if we were to travel to Mars for a long time. So medicine is certainly one of the aspects of actually, space exploration. It's one of the big upcoming fields. And how to get into that field, I think one of the things is certainly if you could do a combination of, taking like biology and astronomy and physics. So that's kind of where, you would have the combination of courses which would make you eligible for, studying these kinds of phenomena. In addition, if you are at a university that gives you a planetary science or space exploration kind of minor or major, depending on the university, you should certainly take that. They'll give you a different perspective of how, for example, if you're going to Mars, what are the conditions, how the body will react to those conditions, things like that. So, kind of looking at the research area, but then from a bigger perspective. Oh, I have another question. What if you want to study astronomy and research, but your academic results are absolutely disgusting? So to give you guys, we're off a track that given this question. So I actually did not do well in school, which I think is contrary to what people think. You don't need to have absolute A pluses everywhere to get into, to do research or get into astronomy. I was looking at my results from grade 11 a couple of months ago, and I actually posted on my Instagram as well about it. I had failed my grade 11 physics midterm. And it was interesting that on my grade, the comments from the teacher was, hey, make sure you work harder in physics. And I looked at it and I laughed because at that time, yes, I wanted to study astronomy and I was so passionate about it. But I think what I was kind of lacking was that systematic understanding of physics when I got into undergrad. Not that in my undergrad marks were really good either. I think there were only a couple of courses where I had A's. I think it was more about passion. I was so passionate. I was networking throughout my undergrad. I was talking to people what I wanted to do. And what I really wanted to understand and achieve. And I think that got me to where I was in grad school. It was all about networking. The people I knew actually suggested my name to my PhD supervisor and said, hey, you should check out this girl's application. I have seen her grow over the years in undergrad. She's really passionate. And she really wants to do, maybe her grades do not reflect how she feels, so or how important this is for her, and that kind of got me through into I guess grad school. And then it's interesting that people think that only grades would actually get you there. That's not always the case. It's really important to actually gain experience, find mentors who can help you achieve. And I think my mentor was great in my undergrad to be able to help me actually get where I am today. So don't be deterred by grades. Try as much as you can to get research experience and network as much as possible. And let people know how passionate you are. You don't need to be a straight A student to be in research or in astronomy in general. I guess it doesn't really have to be astronomy. Any research, if you're passionate about it, it doesn't really matter what grades you are. What really matters is that once you are into it, you make the effort to do your background. So for example, I failed a grade 11 midterm, right, for physics. So when I got into undergrad and got into, my grad school, I really had to work harder than what everyone else was when it came to understanding the physics. I would have to go back and refer back to my grade 11, grade 12 books compared to everyone else who was with me. I was like, oh yeah, that's easy. And I'm like, I don't get it. So I'll have to go back and look at it. So it's very, very similar to being there in like exams, like you're going back and refreshing yourself on trying to prepare for an exam. Grad school, throughout your grad school, is exactly like that. You read so many papers and you do so many things. It's you always have to go back and refer. So I never felt bad that I didn't know anything or didn't know something. I would always feel free to go back to my grade 11 and 12 books. So don't just be passionate about it, be ready to work hard, maybe work harder than everyone else around you is, and that will get you to where you want. Okay. Oh, I think I have one more question came in. what are some ways one can get internships and student research opportunities? Great question. So one of the things that I did not do, because I was an international student, so I was very, I guess I was very boxed in terms of knowing my opportunities. But from what I've learned from other people, hearing their experiences during undergrad or even grad school, is that just email people and ask if they have an opportunity available. If you like someone's research, for example, I have, there's one of the grad students in our department who said that over the summer, every summer in her undergrad, she would literally look up places that she would like to work at. So for example, an observatory or a research group at a certain university, and just email them saying, hey, do you have a position available for the summer or during the school year if you're at a university where you're studying and you like a certain professor whose research is really good and you want to kind of dabble into it. A lot of the times, researchers do have a little bit small projects that undergrads could do, or even just helping grad students to do their projects as well. So just ask. That's kind of one big thing. Ask if they say no, I don't have one right now. That's okay. Send out multiple emails, maybe 10, 50, 100 emails to everywhere around the world where you might want to work, and at least there might be one or two opportunities that will come up for you at that particular time. If not, don't hesitate to not email again for next summer or for during school year. A lot of the times when you send out these emails, a lot of the times people look at it and they sometimes don't reply, but don't feel bad about it because they get hundreds of emails a day, and sometimes you don't get response saying, hey, we don't have a position. They just know that they don't have a position, so they don't even bother to reply. So don't be discouraged by that. Just still feel free to go and check in a couple of weeks later to see if they have received your email, and if there's anything that would be something that you could do for the lab or for the group. And as I said, send out more than one. Don't, just say, oh, I want to work in this particular group, so I'm going to just wait and watch what's happening. Just do 10, 20, 30, 40 emails to different departments or different groups. Yeah, that was a really good question. Research opportunities actually help you a lot when going into grad school, or even just figuring out if this is what you really want to do. I did not decide. I always wanted to I always wanted to go in depth in astronomy, but I did not decide that I really wanted to go and do grad school until my fourth year, because I had this idea of what research would look like, but it's not the same when you actually do it. So when I started doing research in my fourth year, I realized that no, this is really interesting. It kind of gets my brain churning. Every minute I'm trying to think what I could do differently, or what I could do that would give me the result that I'm looking for. So yeah, research is pretty important. Try it out and see if it's actually for you. Yeah, I have another question. Yes, that's what I'm currently doing at the lab. That's really good. Helping grad students is actually, you can put it on your CV and part of your portfolio that you are helping someone else's research. I'm not just sure how to go about getting a position with more responsibilities. So that generally comes with more research experience. So I do know that, for example, if you're doing a research opportunity at the end of first year, the amount of, or the kind of work you will be doing would be a little bit kind of tailored to your background. So how much you have done in year one courses, the kind of research you will be given would kind of pertain to that level. But as you keep doing more and more, so whether it's just over the summer or during school year, it will start getting more intense and start getting more, something with more responsibilities. And that just has to do with not only experience, but also the kind of your background, in terms of you're learning more mathematics, or learning more physics, or learning more high level astronomy, and that kind of gives you an edge, and people are actually more willing to give you responsibilities to be doing more. So just keep at it. Don't be discouraged if your first project just looks like, oh, I just have to plot graphs or something. my first research project wasn't until my fourth year, and that particular project was very simple to start with, and then it got very complicated within like literally a couple of months, because I only had 8 months to start and finish that particular research project. But a lot of people had been working for a while, and so you could see that their research project were way more complicated and had way more diverse responsibilities in terms of from writing code to actually analyzing the results. For me, when I did, even though I was in a fourth year, I had all the background. I was given the code, I didn't write the code, and all I had to do kind of run the models and analyze the data. So I didn't really actually write the code other than my classes that I had to take in school. Other than those, I didn't actually write the code until end of my master's. Actually, even the same thing happened for my master's degree as well. And at the end of my master's degree is when I actually started being confident enough to ask my supervisor that, hey, can I write a little code for this and add this to our already existing code? And that's when, he also had confidence in me to be able to do that, because obviously I don't want to be someone who is, adding things and changing up the codes that it has taken him years to develop. So yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for those questions. Have them keep coming. Love them. Okay, so kind of moving on to, in terms of, my PhD, I actually, as I mentioned, started writing codes when in my PhD. I studied these stars that are very, very, way more massive than our sun, but they're actually very, very young. So these stars are, something on basis of like 8-10 times more massive than our sun. And I ended up studying the area of the disks around it. So these disks are something that the star inherits when it's forming. So all that material that actually forms the star. There's also a lot of leftover material around the star, which is where actually all the planets form from. And I studied, very, very small area of the disk closer to the star, where it's so hot that even dust doesn't survive. It evaporates. That's how hot it gets. These stars are 20, 30, 40,000 degrees on the surface. And so I studied and I modeled actually how these stars, how the temperature changes in the disk, as well as how the density changes in the disk. So that was kind of a pretty interesting, I guess, PhD because no one had ever done it the way I did it. So kind of a new way of thinking what a disk around these massive stars would look like. Now, the same thing, and as I was doing my master's in astronomy, I also was part of the collaborative program, which gave me exposure to planetary science and space exploration. And I continued that in my PhD, just because it gave me kind of, bigger perspective of where my research fits in, because I'm looking at these meteorites that have material from, just before when the star, our own star, our sun, was formed, or material that was formed before the sun, and it's called it has all the characteristics of the material that our star and our planets would have formed from, as well as material from inside the planetary disks. And so it gave me bigger perspective of how, what I was seeing in these disks around these massive stars is something that I can relate to in our solar system and in material in these planets that we have here. And as well, it got me interested into, robotics and satellites and how we use satellites to study other planets, but not also other planets, other objects, so like asteroids, comets, Earth as well. So it was pretty interesting to kind of, broaden my horizon by just taking an extra course, attending seminars. So I think that collaborative program was very helpful. And kind of what I mentioned before, I guess briefly, was astronomy is kind of a big, very interdisciplinary field. You can like stars and study stars, but you can like cosmology, or you can want to understand how the universe formed. You know, the questions could be very small to be very, very, very big. And I think that is what makes space really interesting. And people, whether or not you want to study space in general, is something that generates curiosity in everyone. Whether you're a 4-year-old or a 100-year-old, people love looking at the night sky. But if you really want to get into the field of astronomy, there are a few things that I, as in terms of skills that I would suggest. We did point out quite a lot of things such as research. So, doing research and analysis is pretty important. And so if it is in the field of astronomy or not, doesn't really matter as long as you're learning how to do research, you're learning how to analyze data. One other thing which I, mentioned was computational skills. So I did not code my first, for my research actually. I did code a lot for my classes in my undergrad. I took a lot of classes that had a lot of computational learning, and I think in this day and age, no matter what research you do, you need to know some form of software. Either it's just to have good graphs, or it's actually to, work with your data. Because, for example, when I was running my PhD models, I had thousands of models that I was running through, and there is no way that I can actually physically go through each of those models. Each model took 4 to 5 hours to run, so I had to be mindful of how I'm analyzing this data. And so obviously what I did was kind of write a code to match what my ideal match would be, and ended up with these top 9 matches, and then I would pick the one that looks most similar to the one that I was kind of looking for. So computational skills are very, very important. Problem solving skills, you always, in research, if you are the only person doing that kind of research, you will always have one or other issue going on which you don't know what's happening, why it's happening, especially when you're working with computational modeling and stuff like that. And so, asking other people, what do you think, discussing with them, what do you think is going on, learning how to solve the problem, kind of one of the other skills that you require. And then last but not the skill, I would say, is actually communicating. So, for my PhD, I did something that no one else has done. So I had to be a very, I think the word I'm looking for is something that is very simple for people to understand, because no one has actually, even in my field, no one has actually done it. So kind of being concise about what I'm doing, but at the same time kind of being enough information that they can understand why the different perspective is important. And so communication, whether it's writing a paper or presenting at conferences, or in general presenting to your own group. So presenting to your fellow grad students who understand your project very well because they're working in the same field, and someone who can help you, kind of provide feedback. So communication varies depending on who you're talking to, and communicating the right information at the right level is actually very, very important. And that kind of brings me to science communication, but I'm going to take a question. What about astrobiology compared to astronomy? So that's a very good question. So I particularly like to put astrobiology in a thing called space. So space is like up there, and then you have kind of astrophysics, a part of, one part of it, astrobiology. You have robotics, you have, space geology. There are a lot of these different, fields among space. So astrobiology is actually a very, very interesting field that has fascinated, I think, everyone, because that includes learning about life here on Earth, not only just life in the universe, looking for life in the universe, but it's actually a very up and coming field, especially when we look at these new exoplanets that are being discovered. So these are planets that are outside our solar system, around a star, just maybe like Sun-like star or something that's bigger or smaller. And they pose an interesting I guess, an interesting question of, would that particular planet have life or not? Or if it would have, how would we know what kind of life it is? Because the only data point we have in terms of life is ourselves and everything that we see here on Earth. We don't have any other data points. So it's a very interesting question, and a very, I guess, very, very up and coming field. A lot of people wanna go into astrobiology. And I don't know if you want to know how to get into astrobiology. I do know a couple of astrobiologists who were part of our center for a long time, and who actually studied a lot of different aspects of astrobiology. But yeah, that's a very, very interesting field, which I have not dabbled into a lot, but I just know about it because a lot of people actually ask about astrobiology on a regular basis when I go into classrooms and stuff. Okay, so before I actually go into science communication, I'm going to talk about a little bit about careers in astronomy. So a lot of people think to be in astronomy, all you have is kind of a route. That's the professor. You become a professor. That's how you end up doing astronomy, which is actually not true. So the traditional routes of astronomy, careers in astronomy, are obviously a professor, as I mentioned, but then also you could go into research positions. So a lot of governmental agencies, or you have research institute that just hire you to do research full time. And then you have other aspect of astronomy is kind of teaching and research. So, you have 50-50, you have a workload of teaching courses a semester, and then at the same time you're able to research. But then you also have someone who just teaches astronomy, who has a background and they like teaching, and they do basically teaching rather than research. So those are kind of the traditional routes, but I actually want to talk about the non-traditional routes because that kind of leads me into what I'm going to talk next. So one of the most interesting non-traditional route that has been very popular with people who go into astronomy, whether it's doing it at bachelor's, master's, or PhD level, is data analytics. So people go and become data scientists, data analysts for big companies, banks, things like that. And that's because when you are, this kind of goes back to the skills that I was talking about, research and analytics, that gives you the skill to be a great data scientist. So if you are looking into getting into that field, obviously when you do end up working at a bank, you are no longer doing research in terms of in astronomy, but you're using all the skills that you have gained to do research at that particular institution, whatever that be. But then you have other fields as well that you can apply your skills that I talked about. You could go into science journalism. You could go into science communication, which I'm going to talk about next. If you have a background in engineering, you could actually go into instrumentation. I mean, physicists also go into instrumentation. You could go into space industry, working at places where they build robots, build instruments for these missions, or rockets even. Another good one is a lot of people who study astronomy or even physics. They do have solid background in physics, which, whether you're studying physics or astronomy, a lot of people end up doing climate science or atmospheric science, or being a weather reporter, or being, someone who is running these weather models at governmental institutions or stuff like that. So that's kind of one of the other fields that I personally am really interested in too. What else? I actually have a list right here. Science policy is also an upcoming one where you're advocating for science. You are basically working with government as well as the industries and stuff like that to advocate for science. Another one which has been somewhat popular for the last couple of years, I know one of my profs actually moved on into industry, and he is now a software developer. So, that's kind of another, because you work so much with software development. Depending on your research, a lot of time people do. So you're also learning high performance computing sometimes when you're processing so much data. So, leads you into IT, software development, areas like that. So, that's kind of the two different, areas. You have traditional and non-traditional careers in astronomy. So I definitely picked the non-traditional one, and that just happened by, chance. I was involved in outreach ever since the end of my master's degree. And I just kept working in many different programs at Western in astronomy and planetary science, doing outreach. So I started off with actually being a volunteer for a podcast. And that podcast job kind of gave me the experience on how to talk to people, another skill that I use right now. And at the same time, I think they needed someone who would actually do this as part of their job. And so I ended up getting a graduate TA assistantship, which is a teaching assistantship, which actually paid me for editing a podcast and interviewing people. So that kind of got me into science communication and outreach in a lot more depth than what I was before. I had to go into classrooms as part of my TA-ship. I had to develop activities. I had to come up with, different ways of teaching the same thing. And that's kind of where I got all my experience from. And so closer to the end of my PhD, I was still doing these TA-ships where all of my TA-ships basically ended up being outreach, whether it's working at the observatory or working in the planetary science program. And at the end of my PhD, well, actually a year before I graduated, I literally went around asking people if they have a job in outreach, because when I asked my supervisors what they thought, so my advisory committee, which is kind of what you do in your PhD, where you have a few people who are on a committee where they advise you what you should be doing and kind of keep a tab on you to make sure you're working. I asked them what they thought that I was good at. I had a running list of my skills that I thought I was good at. And, outreach was part of one of those skills. And so a year before, when I had my I think it was second last advisory meeting, I said, what do you guys think that I would be good at? And I distinctly remember my supervisor saying, I can, imagine you being one of the two things, either manager of a space mission, because you're really great at managing things, or you would be someone who's like in outreach, someone who talks to people and gets people excited about space. So I just went around and asked people if they had a job in that field, and I actually ended up with a job. So as soon as I graduated, I started working as an outreach coordinator at the Center for Planetary Science and Exploration, and what I currently do is it ranges on day-to-day basis. It goes anywhere from learning, the methods of teaching a certain thing to a certain age group, to organizing workshops, developing workshops, organizing large-scale events, public events, as well as doing research and gauging the impact of our program. So it's pretty varied on day-to-day basis. I could be, creating kits for these upcoming, workshops that I would be doing, to managing multiple special projects that are going on. Sometimes we have yearly projects that, we get funding for a certain year. And so we're doing this full-scale thing for a year. And then, obviously, as the year rolls over, you have another project. So it's a lot of multitasking of projects. So we still run the podcast that I started with a long time ago when I was finishing up my master's. So I also have to manage that podcast. And then I'm managing a team of people over the summer where we're running summer programs for kids. And I'm working with graduate students to develop activities of their particular expertise. So, for example, this past semester, I had a graduate student who studies moon, and he's a geologist, obviously planetary geologist. And so we had a brainstorming session about activities that we could develop or do with the kids about the moon, because it's the year of the moon, Apollo's 50th anniversary. So so those kinds of things. So a lot of my work is a lot of thinking, but at the same time actually going into classrooms and talking, or being at conferences talking about what the program is, what it does, getting interest from a lot of experts and bringing their expertise in, because my expertise is stellar astronomy. So I studied stars, so that's my expertise. I know a little bit about geology, but not as much as someone who's a grad student in geology would know. So I kind of pick their strengths and my strength as having worked in outreach for so many years, and kind of mingle the two together to develop things that we think kids would enjoy, and at the same time actually match to the curriculum that we have here. So you're not just going to classroom talking about anything, you're actually doing what they should be learning at the age what they are. So that's very interesting. And I have a question here. What if someone hacks the ISS system module and controls the entire station with a joystick? I'm pretty sure that ISS, which actually controlling modules, so there are three different and multiple different organizations that actually are involved in doing this. Obviously, you have NASA, who does most, but you also have Russia. Canada actually helps with the operations of the Canadarm. All of that. I'm pretty sure they have a really, really good, system to make sure there are no hackers in there. I actually don't even know why someone would want to hack into the system module. I think a lot of hackers are more interested in, getting people's money or harassing people in a certain way rather than, doing something on International Space Station. But because you mentioned a joystick, I'm going to mention something. So actually, the joystick that maneuvers the Canadarm is actually very similar to what it would look like if we were to compare it to the PS4 joystick. But yeah, I don't think people would want to hack it. I think they're pretty sure a lot of security around how things happen for such thing, and I hope no one actually does it, because that would be, I don't know, there are people who live up there on the International Space Station. That's kind of the main thing I would think about than anything else. But yeah, interesting random question. Okay, so that's kind of my, what I do as as someone, who handles a big outreach program. I'm going to give you guys a little bit about tips about if you want to get into science communication, what you could do if you haven't started yet and are thinking about it. I think one thing that I learned from my experience is to actually volunteer and just learn from other things by watching other people. I actually, even though I was a TA throughout my PhD in outreach programs, I actually never said no when someone asked me to be like, hey, do you want to help us organize astronomy triathlon for Science Olympics? I'm like, cool, let's do that. And I learned so much stuff by just saying yes. I mean, in grad school, I had the flexibility to do that. Right now, it's very hard for me to say yes to like everything that comes through to my desk. But when I was in grad school, my supervisor was very flexible on when I work, how I work. So it allowed me to actually do a lot of things on the side. I volunteered for quite a lot of different types of, events that were going on. Even with our own department, like I never thought about hours. If I go over the hours, I was like, that's fine, because I like doing what I was doing, and I was kind of gaining experience. I was learning how you talk in classroom to how you talk to someone at a public event, because I would get anyone from like a 6-year-old asking me what a black hole is to a 6-year-old trying to ask me if moon landings were fake, right? So I had to learn all of that, and I learned it by watching what other people were doing. If you're interested in writing, I don't do as much writing as a lot of people who are in science communication do. But if you're, if you are into that kind of thing, I think starting off as writing for blog for your department. So that's actually, I started writing blog for our department very early on, but then, it wasn't something that I was interested in much. But you can start a blog by yourself. You could, help with your university's newspaper or with their department's blogs, website, or your science communication or communications department itself generally has people who are learning how to, or just writing or coming up with ideas to write about these science news or something that their university students or professors have done, and they look for people who are in that department to kind of write it because it makes more sense and it's easier for someone to kind of go in depth but at the same time be at the level of what people would understand. Other ways I think would be to kind of join organizations that do outreach and that look for volunteers and gain experience before you actually go in and find a job that will pay you for doing that. I'm someone who believes that you shouldn't volunteer for a very, very long time, but you should volunteer if you don't have the skill and if you want to gain that skill. Either take a course, that's another way of gaining a skill, or volunteer and learn from other people. And I think in this day and age, we're so lucky that we have things like YouTube, and we have so many, organizations or websites that allows us to gain these skills. So you have, Coursera and other kind of places where you can learn about, whatever it be, whether it be designing a poster or doing graphics, because that's actually one of the very important part of science communication. Simple things like that, you can either learn or you can volunteer and learn from someone who is an expert in the field. And as the more you build your portfolio, the more people know about what you do and how well you do it, that will kind of bring you the kind of work that you would want to do. And I was lucky that I was able to do all of this while I was in grad school. So, I was kind of getting paid to do research, but then on the side, I was also getting, my TA-ship paying for all the experiences that I've gained. And then all the volunteering that I was doing kind of ended up being my strengths when I graduated. We have one more question. Jude is asking, have I ever been to NASA? Not in terms of research. I have been to the Space Center in Houston. A couple of years ago, I went to a conference that is always hosted in Houston, and I was able to take a day off and actually go to the Space Center and check out all the cool things that they had. I would say I've gone to NASA, but I've actually not gone to do any research. My research was pretty isolated. Generally, PhD is generally isolating because you're most probably the only person working on the kind of things you're working. But I didn't actually have a lot of collaborators. It was a very new idea. No one really thought about it. But yeah, I've visited Space Center Houston, and I hopefully will sometime. It's on my bucket list to actually visit the one in Florida and maybe someday JPL in California. We'll see. But yeah, kind of for the last 15-ish minutes, I kind of want to talk about how, obviously, being an astronomer, I was so used to doing research, for my master's and my PhD. After I started, doing a full-time job as an outreach coordinator, we are coordinating so many different things. You're going into classrooms and doing all these different things. I didn't miss research a lot. A lot of the times I'm looking at the data that's coming back from all these workshops we do, or even just the summer program that we run. I'm looking at the feedback, and I'm looking at, how are we going to use this feedback to make our program better? And so lately I have been interested in actually and have been doing research in kind of educational outreach. So I am currently working on a paper that delves into using the feedback and the survey that we did last 3 years for our summer programs, and I'm putting it in form of a paper, and it's going to go into the journals that actually are for communications. So, taking feedback from the kind of programming we were doing, but at the same time, how that program impacts students. Is it doing anything for them? Is it getting them excited, or is it doing any good in terms of passing on the information that we want to pass on, right? Because a lot of the time the summer programming is all about fun because it's summer. And so they're doing a lot of hands-on activity, but are they getting the idea of why they're doing it and how important that is? So that's kind of where I'm getting into educational research, which actually gets me really excited because I get to use softwares again, and I can make, these plots that show me how the data has changed over years, or how even simple things like how has the gender difference been, in terms of in the first few years it was a very, very male dominated program, and now we have had kids who do not identify themselves as male actually attend the summer program, and the numbers have gone up. So that is something that I want to strive towards, and so I look at the data and I try to figure out how we could make it different or better. So that's kind of another aspect of outreach as well. There's a lot of things you could do that pertain to taking on the information you can and then passing it on to people so that they use that information to steer their program accordingly. So that's kind of my entire overview of what astronomy is, how I got into what kind of skills you would need if you want to get into that, transition to science communication, and skills you would need, as well as kind of dwelling into educational outreach, which is very similar to astronomy outreach. You're really excited because all you're doing is learning and analyzing and redeveloping things based on your results. So if you guys have any questions, I would want to take that. If not, you can always DM me at Space Geek Parsh or here at the Addictive Brain, and they can pass it on to me, and I would be more than happy to answer their questions. I hope this was useful for you guys. I mean, we talked a variety of things today, and you guys had some amazing questions, research opportunities, astrobiology, NASA. If any Canadians are watching, CSA. Although I'm wearing a NASA t-shirt, I do have a CSA one as well. Okay, so looks like we do not have any questions. So I'm going to end the live today, but feel free to drop in questions if you have any. I would be more than happy to answer. Thank you.